Thanks for joining us on The Peel, where we get behind the headlines and get some real talk. I'm Jamal Simmons. We are here with two members of our Hill family, political reporter Julian Manchester and multimedia producer Adam Hainsfurther. Billionaire owner of the Miami Dolphins, Stephen Ross, got outed for hosting a six-figure fundraiser for Donald Trump, the president, in the Hamptons this weekend. Ross runs the company that owns SoulCycle, Equinox, and DC food favorites, and Pizza, and Momofuku. Many people are not happy and have been threatening boycotts over Ross's fundraiser for Donald Trump. Julia, I want to start with you, my long-lost friend. So happy to have you back
good to be here.
Yes. I want to start with you because you wrote a story about this week, so you've got some of the details. What is happening with this, and why are people so worked up?
Right. So basically, there was a Washington Post story earlier this week, and they obtained an invitation to this event. And Stephen Ross, who is the chairman and the owner of the related companies, was listed as, hosting an event for President Trump, and it's like thousands of dollars to get in. I mean, I believe it's $250,000 to be able to participate in roundtable discussions in addition to getting your picture with the president. Well, it started to pick up online because the related companies own SoulCycle and Equinox, those luxury fitness brands. And obviously, SoulCycle has an interesting clientele, and so does Equinox. They're both urban and suburban chains, very wealthy clientele in particular, but also pretty popular with millennials.
Michelle Obama's been the SoulCycle, right?
Yeah, Michelle Obama is SoulCycle, and actually a little DC intel here. Michelle Obama goes to SoulCycle where the Kushners, Ivanka and Jared, go to Flywheel. So it's very funny. Side note. But yeah, so people started to get wind of that, and then it just exploded on Twitter with users vowing to cancel their SoulCycle memberships and their Equinox memberships. And SoulCycle and Equinox were forced to really put out a comment saying, we don't endorse this fundraiser. We have nothing to do with it. However, they're still going along. Stephen Ross is still holding this.
And there were some celebrities that made a big stink out of this too, right?
Chrissy Teigen as well, and lots of others who go to SoulCycle and these gyms. So like I said, obviously very wealthy clientele. But one thing I'd like to point out is the location of this fundraiser. It's in the Hamptons, and obviously in the summertime, these people who tend to live in the wealthy areas of Brooklyn or Manhattan, come in summer in the Hamptons, and they're typically Democratic voters.
Yeah.
But when they go, during the fall and winter, the majority of the voters in this area are Trump voters. So it's interesting to see who's going to be surrounding this little shindig today.
And Adam, you got another angle on this story. It's not just limited to these fitness buffs. It's also got a sports angle.
Yeah, the Andy Cohns of the world have really harped on this from the perspective of SoulCycle and Equinox, but for sports fans, this is a whole other thing. This is one more strike against the NFL, which already has lots of problems generating support among younger, more millennial Gen Z audiences because of political stances that they've taken in the past or lack thereof. A lot of this stems out of the kneeling during the national anthem protests that were taken on by Colin Kaepernick and some other players, including Kenny Stills and the Miami Dolphins. And this is important because Kenny Stills is the reason that a lot of sports fans know about this right now. He caught wind of this fundraiser.
Wait. Kenny Stills is one of the guys who Donald Trump was talking about when he said he wanted owners to tell them to get those sons of bitches off the field.
Exactly.
Because they were kneeling during the anthem,
Exactly.
right?
And Kenny Stills is not an ignorant guy. He's been taking this offseason, doing tours of the South, trying to get a better understanding of the history and the culture that goes on down there and how that plays in today's politics. His dad is a former NFL player. His uncle played in the NFL, so he's got a lot of familiarity with the business side of the NFL. When it came out that Ross was holding this fundraiser, from Stills' perspective, Stephen Ross is a guy that has a nonprofit that's all about generating more equality in sports across both racial and gender lines. Donald Trump seems to counter that message at every opportunity, at least in the eyes of people like Kenny Stills. And the point that Stills was really making was Stephen Ross is the kind of guy that donates to both sides. He's one of the few owners in the NFL that makes campaign donations to both Democrats and Republicans alike. In 2018, Sports Illustrated came out with a list of all of the owners in the NFL and a lot of people in front office positions and the campaigns that they made donations to during the midterms. Ross was one of the few owners on that list that made donations to both parties. Kenny Stills and a lot of other people make the argument that you really can't play both sides of this aisle anymore. We're not in the same place that we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so people who are trying to have their cake and eat it too are beginning to get called out for that kind of behavior.
So is this, I'm going to broaden this out a little bit. Okay, this is a big deal. This is going to be a big deal for Ross more so than it is for a lot of other people. But is this something that is indicative of something else happening in the culture, where because an owner or an investor in a company does something people don't like, that a bunch of people online sort of come out and want to boycott or stay away from that company? Remember when Howard Schultz wanted to run for president as an independent, a lot of people came out and said no, because we don't want him to, because he might throw the election one way or the other. But also they were going to boycott Starbucks because of this.
Right. I think it's really indicative of how divided we are as a culture and a society right now, and this all plays out online. And obviously this boycott really caught fire because of Twitter and Instagram and these social media platforms. And I was listening to a journalist on CNN earlier today, and Christina Alessi, she made a very interesting point. I believe it was her. She essentially said, this necessarily won't hurt Stephen Ross in the long run, but who it will hurt is your day-to-day instructors at SoulCycle and Equinox, your employees there that might not necessarily know the views of Ross. So I'm wondering if this was a good business decision on the part of Ross, because he's going to come out fine from all of this. He will be all right. But these businesses and the people that work for them, maybe not.
So you think people might actually stick with this? You think that this boycott might happen?
It's really it's hard to tell where it will go, and I think in the 24-hour news cycle, our attention spans are so short.
Yeah.
But we're so divided, and I think a lot of people look at this and say, if you're in any way associated with Trump, I'm against you, and vice versa.
Yeah, Adam.
See, I think this plays in less into the divides that we have in our country, which are undeniable, and more into the fact that millennials and Gen Z in particular love performative outrage.
Yeah.
We love being a part of a protest movement, even if there really isn't any movement to that protest. The reaction is to punish the workers of companies that man has invested in. That guy isn't going to feel a thing. I don't think that there's going to be a lot to these boycotts. I think that just like we saw with Starbucks, just like we saw with Keurig after they pulled advertising from Fox News, like we saw with Nike after the Colin Kaepernick stuff, this isn't really going to go anywhere. And what you're going to end up having happen is all it's going to do is extend this news cycle. You're going to hear Stephen Ross's name a whole lot more. Maybe down the road, 5-6 years from now, he ends up selling the Dolphins at a huge profit, because that's how the sports business works these days.
So is this a particularly big thing for liberals and progressives, or are conservatives doing the same thing when it comes to somebody like Jeff Bezos, right? The president goes around and he tries to poke at Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, who spends a lot of time investigating the president. But are conservatives trying to boycott Amazon because Jeff Bezos comes after Donald Trump?
It doesn't seem like you hear as much about that. And I think Jeff Bezos has especially here in DC, so maybe this isn't the best indicator, but he has such a wide reach. It's the Washington Post, it's Whole Foods, it's Amazon. So I think it's a lot
of other reasons to be mad at Bezos.
Exactly, but it's almost difficult for people to boycott it when Amazon has become almost so ingrained in our culture. I don't think you hear it as much from conservatives. I think they have a very different tactic about going about these things.
Jeff Bezos is basically rich Uncle Pennybags, the monopoly man to life, but you don't see a lot of people from either side protesting against Amazon, which, beyond the fact that it's a company that's owned by a guy who presents as a liberal, has all sorts of labor issues.
Right.
The way that they treat their workers in these warehouses is incredible, in the worst possible way. And you don't hear anyone on either side really having a serious conversation about Amazon.
You brought up Nike a minute ago, and Nike's a case for something in the alternative, because Nike actually had a benefit for doing something that was political.
The Nike thing is really fascinating to me. I think that, one, what happened in the wake of the Nike boycott was that you had a lot of people who I am leery of calling conservative, because I really don't think that the anger at Colin Kaepernick has as much to do with him choosing to kneel so much as the color of his skin and him choosing to kneel. But conservative people on the right got really angry. They burned Nike sneakers or jerseys or T-shirts.
And Kaepernick was a spokesperson.
Right, and Kaepernick was a spokesperson. He's been out of the NFL for over 800 days currently, and when the deal was announced last year, he was still out of the league. He hasn't played a down of professional football in Canada or the U.S. ever since he left the 49ers. And what ended up happening was Nike stock went through the roof, because while, yes, there was a small minority of Americans who were destroying Nike gear, the majority of the world saw what they were doing and said, I like this, I want to support this, I'm going to buy more Nike product, and Nike stock skyrocketed.
All right, so this might be the place where Equinox or SoulCycle can sell those super expensive gym clothes for even more money if they get if they get the right spokesperson to counteract what their owners do.
Exactly. But I mean, I think that the clientele of Equinox and SoulCycle is so telling because they have such a wealthy clientele. But wealthy, whether they're rich liberals, they could have rich conservatives. They have younger millennials who tend to be more liberal. So I think going forward, it's going to be a little tricky for them to really market their way through this, because before they weren't seen as political at all. It was kind of a thing, all stripes of people came in from the political spectrum.
Let me just say this, I don't see a way that a bunch of people who are preparing for the beach season for the rest of this summer are going to stop going to the gym.
No.
I just don't see it happening.
I actually think the real impact of this on Stephen Ross, on his companies, you might see that with And Pizza. This is going to get really inside DC.
Well, we're not going to get really inside DC.
But when the ownership of Taylor Gourmet had a meeting with Donald Trump, that's a local sandwich shop here in DC,
right.
The company went out of business after that. People stopped going. They closed every single store. They're only just now, after being auctioned off, coming back to life. If the same thing happens to And Pizza because of this fundraiser, then maybe we're going to start being able to say, okay, these people mean business.
Well, one of my favorite stories from this week, as we get out of here, one of my favorite stories from this week is Woody Harrelson, who said he had a tough meeting with Trump, and afterwards he had to go out and light up a
Yeah, I wouldn't know anything about what you're talking about, Jamal.
Light up a joint. Anyway, all right. That's the end of today's show. Thank you two for being here. This is great. This is like a family meeting. It's not even Thanksgiving. We're having a good time.
Pre-Labor Day family reunion.
Yeah, we're going to have you all back. All right. Thanks a lot for joining us here on The Peel. I'm Jamal Simmons. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.